My name is Maya Sterling. I am 29 years old. 3 days ago, my mother held my left hand up to the light of a crystal chandelier, let out a soft, pitying laugh, and said, "Is this the best he could do? Your father spent 3 months' salary on mine, Maya. A man's investment in a ring is an investment in your future." Then, she turned to my sister, Elena, standing by the mahogany sideboard. "Show her yours again, sweetie. Remind her what a real commitment looks like." My fiancé was standing right behind her in the shadows of the kitchen doorway, holding a bottle of wine he'd brought as a gift. He heard every word. What he did the next morning cost exactly $0, but it cost my mother everything she had spent 30 years building. Before I tell you how the Sterling family legacy crumbled over a single cup of Saturday morning coffee, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you've ever felt like the black sheep in a family that measures love in carats and zip codes. Drop a comment with your location and the time. I want to know who's out there listening to the truth finally come out. Let me take you back to last Friday evening, the night my mother decided to test the wrong man's patience. To understand why that laugh felt like a serrated blade, you have to understand the Sterlings. We live in an Aspen Mountain retreat that looks like it belongs on the cover of Architectural Digest. My mother, Celeste Sterling, is 58. She's never held a paying job, and she wears that fact like a badge of honor. "My career is this family," she likes to say, usually while adjusting hand-painted place cards for one of her intimate dinners for 40. She doesn't manage a household, she manages a brand. My father, Arthur, is a retired structural engineer. He spent his life ensuring bridges wouldn't collapse, yet he spent 30 years letting my mother erode the foundation of our home. He answers every question with whatever she wants to hear, believing that silence is the same thing as peace. Then there's Elena, the golden child. She's 33, married to a senior partner at a top-tier law firm. Elena's wedding was a 3-day gala with a string quartet flown in from Vienna and a diamond that could be seen from space. Celeste mentions the 3-carat standard at least once a month. And then there's me. I'm an emergency room doctor. I work 80-hour weeks. I've held the hands of strangers while they took their final breaths. I've restarted hearts at 4 in the morning when the world was silent and cold. I pay my own mortgage on a small cabin in the woods. I've been independent since the day I moved out at 18. In Celeste's world, independent isn't a compliment. It's code for the daughter I couldn't break. If you walk into our living room, there's a photo wall, a curated gallery of Sterling achievements. There are 7 photos of Elena, her graduation, her wedding, her honeymoon in the Maldives. There are only 2 of me. One is a group shot where I'm partially hidden by a flower arrangement. The other is a grainy photo of me at age 11, holding a trout I caught at the lake. When your mother counts everything. Square footage, bank balances, social invitations, you learn to count the gaps. And on that wall, the gap where I should have been was a canyon. I met Liam Hollis 3 years ago in the middle of a double shift. He didn't come in for himself. He came in at midnight carrying a 19-year-old apprentice named Leo who had taken a bad fall on a job site. Liam stayed with him, wrapped the leg himself, and drove through a mountain blizzard to get him to me. He sat in the hallway for 5 hours in his work boots, covered in cedar dust, just waiting. He didn't want the kid to wake up in the dark alone. That's who Liam is. He's 31, and he owns a custom woodworking shop. He builds dining tables that will last a century. He measures success in the grain of the wood and the strength of the joinery, not the number on a paycheck. 2 weeks ago, he proposed to me on the roof of his workshop under a sky that looked like black velvet. He built the ring box himself from a block of salvaged walnut. The ring inside wasn't a diamond, it was a deep, navy blue sapphire set in a simple white gold band. It looked like the sky just before the stars come through. I loved it because it was honest. And I loved it because it was the one thing Celeste Sterling would never choose. When I called Elena to tell her, her first question wasn't about how I felt. It was, How many carats is the center stone? I told her it was a sapphire. There was a long, cold silence. Oh, Maya, she whispered. Mom is going to have thoughts. Just be ready. I should have heard the warning. In the Sterling household, a sapphire isn't a gem, it's a failure of status. I didn't know then that there was a secret history to that blue stone. Liam hadn't told me yet. And that story would end up being the sledgehammer that brought Celeste's world down. Friday evening arrived with a high-altitude chill. Celeste had organized a casual celebratory dinner. In Celeste speak, that meant a formal four-course meal and an audience. When Liam and I pulled into the heated driveway, I saw two luxury SUVs I didn't recognize. My stomach did a slow, familiar roll. Inside were Margaret and Sylvia, Celeste's inner circle. These are the women who know the price of every silk scarf in the valley but couldn't tell you the last names of their own housekeepers. I thought this was family only, I whispered to Liam. He squeezed my hand, his palm rough from the workshop, grounding me. It's fine, Maya, he said. I'm not here for them. The moment we walked into the dining room, Celeste didn't offer a hug. She walked straight to me, grabbed my left wrist, and pulled my hand toward the light. The 3 seconds of silence that followed felt like 3 hours. Then came the laugh. It was a soft, airy sound. The kind you'd use for a child who had made a silly mistake. Is this what he could afford, darling? She asked, her eyes flicking to Liam. She turned to my father. Arthur, remember when you proposed? You spent 3 months' salary. You understood that a woman's hand reflects her husband's ambition. Arthur didn't look up. He just kept pouring water. Celeste turned back to the table, her voice rising so her friends wouldn't miss a beat. Elena, show her yours again, sweetie. Let's remind Maya what a real commitment looks like. Elena hesitated. I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but she did it anyway. She held out her hand, and the 3-carat diamond threw 100 fractured rainbows across the tablecloth. Celeste smiled, that sharp, satisfied smile of a woman who had just won a game nobody else knew they were playing. I tucked my hand under the table. I was 29 years old, a doctor who saved lives, and in that room, I felt like a child who had brought home a failing grade. But here's the part Celeste didn't account for. Liam had heard the pity laugh. He had watched my mother use my sister as a weapon to humiliate me. And as Liam stepped into the light, he didn't look angry. He looked clinical. He looked like a man who had just spotted a fatal flaw in a structure and was deciding exactly how to take it down. The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Celeste detailed the engagement party she'd already tentatively booked at the Mountain Club. 80 guests. A 5-tier cake. She talked about the guest list as if Liam and I were props. She referred to Liam only as Maya's woodworker. I watched Liam throughout the meal. He was polite and gracious. But I noticed his hands. He wasn't clenching them. He was tracing the grain of the heavy oak table. My mother's prized French antique. He was measuring it. He was seeing the gaps. When we finally escaped, the silence in the truck was heavy. I waited for him to explode. Instead, he just held my hand, his thumb tracing circles over the sapphire. It wasn't until we were standing in my kitchen that he finally spoke. Maya, he said, his voice a low vibration. Has she always been like this? Does she always use the things you love to make you feel small? I looked at the blue stone on my finger. Always, I whispered. Liam nodded. He didn't offer a platitude. Then tomorrow morning, he said, I'm going to call her. I'm going to give her a chance to be the mother you deserve. If she doesn't take it, then I'm going to show her what a woodworker can actually do to a house built on lies. I stayed up long after he fell asleep, watching the shadows of the pines shift on the snow. I had given Celeste Sterling 29 years of yes. I had given her 29 years of trying to be enough. In the morning, Liam made coffee, his face a determined mask. He picked up his phone and dialed the Aspen house at exactly 8 a.m. He put it on speaker. My mother's voice came through, warm and performative. "Liam, darling," she chirped. "I was just about to call the caterer." "Celeste," Liam interrupted. His voice was like a chisel on stone. "I'm not calling about the party. I'm calling about what you said to Maya last night. I think you dropped something at the table, and I think it's time you picked it up." There was a long, cold silence. In that gap, I saw a notification on my phone, a message from my sister from 2 Christmases ago that I had completely forgotten. A message that proved Celeste wasn't just targeting me. She had a scorecard. And I was about to find out exactly how many people were on it. The blue of the sapphire caught the morning light, deep and unwavering. As Liam's voice cut through the static of the speakerphone. Celeste didn't apologize. She didn't even stumble. In her world, an insult was just honesty wrapped in expensive silk. "Liam, darling," she said, her tone shifting into that breezy, condescending lilt she used for service staff. "Maya is far too sensitive. It's a family trait. I was merely pointing out that a wedding is a public statement. If you're going to join this family, you have to understand that we don't just do things. We do them correctly." Liam didn't flinch. He sat at my small kitchen table, his hand wrapped around a mug of black coffee. "Correctly," he repeated. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm sitting, Celeste, it looks like you're more interested in the price of the glass than the person holding it. I heard what you said about the 3-month salary. I heard you tell Elena to show off her diamond to make Maya feel small." There was a silence. The kind that happens right before a storm breaks over the peaks. Then, the pivot to the victim. It was a move my mother had perfected over 30 years. "I have spent my entire life building a reputation for my daughters," Celeste hissed, her voice rising. "I have opened doors for Maya that she tried to kick shut. And this is how you repay me? By calling my home at 8 in the morning to lecture me? If Maya has a problem, she can tell me herself. But I suspect she's just letting her woodworker do her dirty work because she knows I'm right." The line went dead. The click echoed in the quiet cabin like a gunshot. For 29 years, that click had been the end of the conversation. It was her final word, her way of saying the balance was zero and I was overdrawn. But Liam just set the phone down. "She didn't even hesitate," I whispered. Liam reached across the table and took my hand. "She didn't hesitate because she doesn't think she did anything wrong, Maya. To her, love is a transaction, and she thinks you're underselling the brand." By noon, the digital campaign had begun. Celeste Sterling didn't just get angry, she mobilized. My phone became a vibrating weapon on the counter. Elena called first. "Maya, Mom is in hysterics. She says Liam attacked her. Can't he just call and smooth things over? You know how she gets about her events, Sot." She laughed at my ring. "Elena," I said, my voice shaking. "She used you to humiliate me in front of her friends." "I know," Elena whispered, and for a second, the socialite mask slipped. I hated it. "But Maya, is this really the hill you want to die on? The party is already in the club's calendar. If you don't play along, Mom will make sure everyone thinks Liam is the reason you've changed. Then came the text from my father. "Maya, your mother is very upset. If everyone just apologized, we could move past this. Let's keep the peace, sweetheart." Classic Arthur. He didn't want the truth, he wanted quiet. He'd spent 30 years splitting the blame down the middle just so he wouldn't have to hear the shouting. I was about to delete the thread when I scrolled further back into my archived messages. That's when I saw it, a screenshot from 2 Christmases ago that I had saved on instinct. It was a message from Elena, sent after she and Tyler had left the Aspen house. Mom said Tyler's gift to her was thoughtless because it wasn't something she could show her friends. She's already ranked his gift below Dad's in the family ledger. Asterisk. I stared at the screen. Tyler was a senior partner at a law firm. He was the golden son-in-law. And yet, even he wasn't safe from the invisible ruler Celeste used to measure our worth. She didn't have a favorite child, she had a system. Elena was the display case, but Tyler was just another piece of collateral. I showed the text to Liam. He read it, his jaw tightening. She doesn't just rank the rings, Maya, he said. She ranks the souls. And it's time the golden son-in-law knew he's being measured, too. Saturday afternoon felt like the air before a lightning strike. We sat in the workshop, the smell of cedar and sawdust a sanctuary compared to the suffocating luxury of my mother's house. I've been trying for 29 years, Liam, I said. One more year, one more party, it's not going to change her. I don't want to change her, Liam said, setting down his plane. I want to stop her from changing us. I don't want our future children thinking their value is a number on a tax return. He walked over to my laptop. We're going to send an email. Not an attack. Just the blueprints of the truth. We spent 2 hours drafting it. It was addressed to Celeste but copied to my father, Elena, and Tyler. We laid it out in 4 clear points. First, a direct account of what Celeste said at the dinner, her exact words and the comparison. Second, the real story of the sapphire. Third, we officially declined the Pinecrest party. Fourth, we informed them that our wedding would be planned and paid for by us, and that Celeste was welcome as a guest, not a director. There was one paragraph that Liam wrote alone. Asterisk. The sapphire in Maya's ring belonged to my grandmother, Ruth Hollis. She wore it for 41 years. My grandfather, a carpenter like me, chose it because he said it was the color of the sky on the day they met. It survived 3 recessions and a lifetime of hard work. It is the most valuable thing I own, not in carats, but in the kind of love that doesn't require an audience. Asterisk. I looked at Liam. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. Send it, I said. He pressed the button at 5:47 p.m. I watched the sent icon appear, and I knew that within 60 seconds, the sterling scorecard was public knowledge. I didn't know yet how Tyler would react to the thoughtless gift reveal, but as I looked at the sapphire on my finger, I realized for the first time that the sky doesn't have a price tag. It just exists, and I was finally standing under it. The sent icon blinked once and vanished, leaving a heavy, electric silence in the workshop. Liam didn't look at the screen, he looked at his hands, still dusted with the pale shavings of the white oak table he was building. For 30 years, my mother had used the sterling ledger to keep everyone in line, a silent account of who owed what and who fell short. But as that email hit 5 different inboxes, the ledger wasn't private anymore. It was a public record. It's out there now, Maya, Liam said, his voice low and steady. No more whispers in the kitchen. No more you know how she is. I felt a sharp vibration in my pocket, the first tremor of the landslide. It wasn't a call. It was a text from Tyler, the golden son-in-law. Asterisk. Maya, Liam, just read the email. We need to talk. Not at the house. Sullivan's Bar. 9 p.m. Asterisk. My heart skipped. Tyler, the man who billed $400 an hour and never missed a country club gala, was stepping out of orbit. Celeste had spent years polishing his image to reflect her own, but she'd forgotten that even the most expensive mirror cracks if you hit it with the truth. The truth didn't happen in a grand ballroom, it happened in the front seat of Liam's truck, idling in the driveway of the Pinecrest Mountain Club. We had driven there to officially sign the cancellation papers for the engagement party Celeste had hijacked. As I sat there, watching the wealthy members glide through the glass doors, Liam reached into the glove box and pulled out a small, tattered velvet pouch. I wanted to wait until the wedding to tell you this part, he said, his voice thick with history. He opened the pouch. Inside was a small, handwritten note, the paper yellowed and fragile. It was from his grandmother, Ruth. To Liam, it read. Asterisk when you find the woman who sees the sky in this stone, tell her it wasn't bought with a bank account. It was bought with George's overtime at the lumber mill during the winter of '61. He didn't have a coat that year, so I could have this blue. Wear it for the love that stays warm when the money is cold. Asterisk I held the note against my chest, the tears finally breaking through the professional armor I'd worn for a decade. My mother had laughed at a ring that represented a man freezing so his wife could feel beautiful. She hadn't just insulted Liam, she had spat on a 41-year legacy of sacrifice. She'll never understand, will she? I whispered. Liam looked at the Pinecrest clubhouse, a monument to everything that can be bought. No, Maya. She can't see the sky because she's too busy looking at the price of the ceiling. The fallout began to unfurl at 9:15 p.m. at Sullivan's, a dive bar on the edge of town that smelled of stale hops and honest work. Tyler was already there, sitting in a back booth, his silk tie loosened. He didn't look like a senior partner. He looked like a man who had just realized he was a line item. She really said it, didn't she? Tyler asked, his jaw tight. The thoughtless gift. The knives. I nodded, sliding my phone across the table to show him the screenshot of Elena's text. Tyler read it, a bitter laugh escaping his throat. I spent weeks researching those blades. I wanted her to have something she'd actually use. And she ranked them. He looked at Liam with a new respect in his eyes. You're the only one who had the guts to put it in writing, Liam. For 5 years, I've been trying to bill my way into her approval. I thought if I made partner, if I bought the right car, I'd finally be a sterling. He took a long pull of his beer. But the ledger always changes, doesn't it? No matter what you give, you're always in the red. As we sat there, my phone lit up with a call from my father. I stepped outside into the freezing mountain air to answer. Maya, he said, and for the first time in my life, his voice wasn't a buffer. It was exhausted. Your mother is, she's packed a bag for the guest room. She says she's refining the guest list for the party. Dad, the party is cancelled. Liam and I signed the papers an hour ago. There was a silence on the other end, a long, seismic pause. Good, Arthur said. Just one word. No, keep the peace, no, apologize to your mother. He hung up, and I stood in the snow, realizing the sterling foundation hadn't just cracked, it had completely given way. Celeste was upstairs refining a list for a party that didn't exist, while the men she thought she controlled were sitting in a dive bar, finally learning how to speak the truth. The scorecard was empty, and for the first time in 29 years, I wasn't afraid of the zero. I was looking at the sky. The Pinecrest Mountain Club was bathed in a deceptive, golden glow as we pulled into the valet circle on Saturday night. This was the party we had officially cancelled. The 80-person gala Celeste had refused to let die. She had spent 48 hours on the phone telling her circle that the cancellation was a clerical error, that I was just overwhelmed, and that the celebration would proceed as planned. I stood in the foyer, smoothed the fabric of my navy dress, and felt the weight of the sapphire against my skin. Liam adjusted his cuffs, his face a mask of carved granite. We weren't there as honorees, we were there as witnesses. As the doors opened, the sound of a string quartet spilled out like expensive clockwork. Celeste was at the center of the room in cream-colored silk, holding a glass of champagne like a scepter. She saw us, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes flared with panicked calculation before the hostess mask snapped back into place. She glided toward us, her voice a hushed, sharp command. You're late. Smile. Don't you dare ruin this. She didn't realize the room was already changing. Tyler and Elena were standing by the bar, watching. My father was near the balcony, his hands deep in his pockets, looking at the stars instead of the guest list. Celeste tapped her glass with a silver spoon, the high, clear chime silencing the room. Tonight, she began, her voice amplified by the ballroom's acoustics, is about the standards we keep. The Sterlings have always stood for the best, and I am so proud to see Maya finally joining a tradition of excellence. She looked at my hand, her smile thin and dangerous. Even if she chooses a more creative path for her jewelry. The confrontation didn't come from a shout, it came from the silence I allowed to stretch after she finished. I stepped toward the microphone. I didn't take it from her, I stood beside her, my voice carrying with the practiced clarity of a doctor delivering a diagnosis. My mother is right about one thing, I said, my gaze moving across the 80 faces of Aspen's elite. Tonight is about standards. But not the kind you can buy at a jeweler. I held up my left hand, the sapphire glowing under the chandeliers. This stone survived the winter of 1961. It survived a man named George Hollis working double shifts in the freezing cold without a winter coat so his wife could have something beautiful. It wasn't a 3-month investment in social standing. It was a 41-year investment in a life built on sacrifice, not scorecards. I looked directly at Celeste. Her face began to crumble. I know this ring doesn't meet the sterling standard, I continued, my voice low and unwavering. But it meets a higher one. It represents a love that doesn't need to rank its gifts to feel valuable. And if that makes me the uncontrollable daughter, then I accept the title. The room didn't erupt in applause. It did something far more devastating to Celeste, it whispered. I saw Sylvia and Margaret lean into each other, their eyes tracking Tyler, who was now raising his glass not to Celeste, but to Liam. The fallout continued in the quiet aftermath of the toast, in the oak-paneled library where my father had retreated. He was standing by the grandfather clock, his thumb tracing the wood. Celeste burst in, her face stripped of all artifice. You let her do it. You let her humiliate me in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what this does to our standing? My father didn't flinch. He didn't offer a platitude. He just looked at his wife. I've spent 30 years as your buffer, Celeste, Arthur said, his voice sounding like a bridge finally giving way. I've spent 30 years telling Maya it'll be fine while you measured her soul against a price tag. But tonight, I realized I wasn't keeping the peace. I was keeping the lie. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. The actual family ledger Celeste had kept for decades, documenting every gift and every perceived slight. He tossed it onto the desk. I found this in your vanity, Celeste. I read what you wrote about Tyler. I read how you ranked Maya's med school graduation below Elena's country club debut because there weren't enough influential guests. He walked toward the door, stopping only to look at me. I'm moving into the guest room tonight, Maya. I think I've spent enough time in the shadow of this house. Celeste sat in the heavy leather chair, the scorecard lying open between us, exposing 30 years of calculated cruelty. The Sterling legacy wasn't a fortress, it was a paper house, and the wind was finally starting to blow. The silence that followed my father's departure was absolute, a vacuum where the Sterling standard used to breathe. Celeste sat in the high-backed leather chair, her fingers trembling over the open ledger. She wasn't looking at the guests anymore. She was looking at the ink-stained evidence of her own isolation. For 30 years, she had been the architect of our worth, but as the grandfather clock chimed the hour, she looked less like a queen and more like a tenant whose lease had just expired. I didn't want this, Maya, she whispered, her voice stripped of its theatrical projection. I just wanted you to have a life people respected. I wanted you to be safe from the smallness I grew up in. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see a villain. I saw a mirror. The reveal wasn't a hidden bank account, it was the realization that Celeste had been bullied by her own mother into believing love was a performance and status was the only shield. She had spent 3 decades projecting her trauma onto her daughters, building a fortress of carats to hide a girl who was still afraid of being not enough. I reached out and closed the ledger. Safety isn't a price tag, Mom, I said, my voice steady. And respect isn't something you can demand from a podium. It's earned in the quiet moments, like Liam waiting in a hospital hallway for a kid who had no one else. I walked out of the library and toward the balcony where Liam was waiting. He didn't ask what happened. He just took my hand, the sapphire catching the cold mountain light. We walked past the empty champagne flutes and the hushed whispers of guests who were already calling their cars. The sterling legacy wasn't being destroyed, it was being recalculated. And for the first time in 29 years, the math finally made sense. The transition from the ballroom to the sawdust-scented warmth of Liam's workshop was the shift from fiction to reality. We didn't wait for a suitable mourning period for the family's reputation. We began drafting a new blueprint the very next morning. The wedding wouldn't be a 3-day gala, it would be a Saturday evening in October, right between the maples and the double doors of the shop. I sent out the invitations myself, 40 hand-pressed cards on recycled paper. No hosted by, no social secretary. Just our names and a map. The terms I set for my mother were non-negotiable, delivered during a quiet lunch. "You are a guest, Mom," I told her, looking at her bare face and the simple clip in her hair. "You don't pick the flowers, you don't approve the guest list, and you don't rank the groom." She didn't argue. She just nodded, a woman who had finally realized that being a manager had cost her a daughter. The new blueprint of our family started to take shape. Elena called me every Tuesday, not to manage a crisis, but to tell me about Tyler's new hobby, restoring old watches. He had stopped billing $400 an hour on weekends and started working with his hands. My father remained in the guest room for 3 months, a silent strike that only ended when Celeste agreed to see a therapist. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, it was structural repair. We were stripping the house down to the studs to see if the frame could still hold the weight of the truth. The morning of the wedding, the aspen air smelled of wood smoke and turning leaves. We had strung simple white lights between the maple trees and the workshop eaves. There was no string quartet from Vienna, just a local fiddler playing a tune that felt like it grew out of the mountainside. I stood in the workshop, surrounded by the scent of cedar, wearing a dress that cost less than the 3-carat standard and feeling 1,000 times more valuable. My father walked me down the aisle, his grip steady. Elena stood beside me as my maid of honor, her own diamond ring tucked into her pocket, choosing to let the moment shine on its own. And then there was Celeste. She sat in the front row, holding a container of her pasta, the only contribution I had allowed her to make. She didn't look at the other guests to see if they were impressed. She looked at me. And when Liam slid the white gold band next to the sapphire, she didn't laugh. She didn't measure. She just closed her eyes and let out a breath she'd been holding for 35 years. Liam and I stood under the stars, the sapphire on my finger reflecting the deep navy of the sky. George and Ruth's legacy was no longer a secret, it was the foundation of our new home. 0 carats, Liam whispered as we took our first dance on the gravel driveway. And worth everything, I replied. I looked at the workshop, at my family standing together without a scorecard in sight, and I realized the sterling standard was finally dead. We weren't a brand anymore. We were a story. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly how it ended, with a love that didn't need to be proven, only lived.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe Family Files for more.